Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Quack and Code. And for this episode, we're going to talk about ad hoc reporting. We're going to discuss first, like the definition. I think just to be everybody on the same page. And I have a really, I would say, fun and interesting guest because he's also just a new teammate in MotherDuck, Jacob Matson, and he's going to talk to us to that. Jacob,
Hi,
welcome.
Mehdi. Thanks. How are
How are
you
you
doing?
doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
So
It's good to be here.
yeah, and so first couple of weeks, and I threw out off the fence with a live stream. So just to get you warm up.
Totally.
How do you feel about the topic? But first, let's introduce yourself and and a bit about your background, where you come
Sure.
from exactly.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So my background is I actually have a uh, degree in accounting and computer science, and so my career started on the accounting side. I kind of like to make jokes that like I've always worked on data pipelines that just ran once a month. And the data piece of it kind of came very naturally to me over time. And so a lot of my experience kind of is much more kind of in the domain than it is kind of in the kind of more hardcore technology space. My perspective is we need better tools to help us enable to do awesome stuff. So that's part of why I'm excited about MotherDuck. Yeah, so that's the quick intro. Anything else I should hit on, Mehdi?
Yeah, when I'm curious, when was the first time you play with DuckDB?
It was probably like fall of 2021 is my guess. I'd been working with like DBT for a few years. My background is mostly in the Microsoft stack, so SQL Server. And there's this gap between, once you get to more than 1 million rows, it's very difficult to use Excel in a scalable way. And so I had some data sets that were larger than 1 million rows, and I needed to do some work with them. And so DuckDB just had an awesome CSV reader. At the time, there was, the spatial package now can read Excel, so I can skip some steps, but, I could export the data I was looking at it in CSV, or I actually had some fun files that were like tab partitioned Excel files, right? So they were like 1 million rows per tab in one Excel file. It was very fun, like data sets to like deal with. So like ripping those one tab at a time to CSV and then combining them, in DuckDB was kind of how it started. So very much out of like a need. And then from there, it's kind of expanded and, become more useful. Partially for two reasons there. I've gotten a lot better in Python. And the second piece is, the functionality of DuckDB has grown since the first version I installed, which was probably like 0.4, something like that, 0.5. I
Yeah.
don't know. There.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's a whole different word compared to when you started. But so if I understand correctly, you're an Excel user converted to DuckDB. Is that correct?
I'm still an Excel user, but
Okay.
DuckDB is a great tool in the toolbox. I like to think about Excel is my favorite tool in the world for consumption of data. Um, it is not good for creation, right? And that includes like pipelines and transformations, but a lot of people use it that way. And so if you kind of think about, those two different modalities, DuckDB fits in really nicely to replace a lot of that workload that used to be creation and transformation in Excel. And now I just do that, in DuckDB and Python, and then, can still do exploration and pivot tables and so on, on the final data set using Excel.
Yeah, no, but that's fair. I just ask, let us know in the audience if you're both Excel and DuckDB user. I think it's a kind of a niche profile. If your data stack is basically that, right? I'm not saying I do use Google Sheet from time to time, pretty rarely, but it's part of my stack, right? But if your stack is Excel and DuckDB, maybe there is something to dig in, and let us know
Sure.
in the comment in the chat. But so moving on to the ad hoc reporting, which is our topic today. How do you define your ad hoc reporting by itself?
Yeah, so I think about ad hoc reporting really as about, you have a need that you need an answer for right now. It's a one-time ask. It's hard to get with the existing data set, right? So a lot of times, those types of asks are really driven by, the executive team, right? It's like, hey, I saw that our churn changed from X% to Y%, why, right? And those questions can be difficult to answer, especially if you don't have the right telemetry in place. But what they're really telling you is when you get an ad hoc request is like, hey, this is something important that's hard, right? Because if it was easy, unimportant, it wouldn't make its way to you. And so, what I like to think about, and kind of what I really think we can do with DuckDB and MotherDuck is like turn that into something that's much easier and repeatable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is also the kind of like a storytelling. What I've seen on ad hoc reporting is like, which you would spend a bit more time, as you mentioned, on a problem which is a bit more complex to try to nuance the answer. Like exactly as you mentioned, like, oh, this is down. Why? Oh, because we didn't do any sales. No, it's a bit more than that. And so there is the story around this. And I think this is, in my experience, that was hard to kind of like reproduce systematically with like standard BI tool. Like I'm just asking you, like,
Yeah.
based on your experience, like DuckDB, and MotherDuck, out of the picture, you have a classic dashboarding tool. How do you use to do those like ad hoc, requests before?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're kind of getting at like what, like how would I think about that? Answering ad hoc reporting questions. Is that what your question is?
Yeah. And also just like on the stack, like before, like what was like your tool set? I mean, you mentioned
totally.
Excel, and I'm sure you're gonna mention it again, but
yeah. I mean, the core of that workflow for me and what I got pretty good at was definitely doing that in Excel, right? So, exporting data into CSV, or if I was fortunate enough for it to be in a SQL database that I could reach from Excel, using Power Query, pulling that data in, mashing it up, kind of tweaking it a little bit. And then kind of producing an end result. Yeah, I mean, mostly in SQL or mostly in Excel. But via lots of tools, right? If someone's asking a churn question, I might go to the CRM and pull down a list of active customers, right? And then put that into Excel. I might go to QuickBooks or NetSuite or whatever to get revenue by customer over the last in number of periods and compare that, so I can just say, okay, I can see this customer had 0 revenue this period and they had $10,000 last period. Like there's a churn example, right? Which brings its own challenges, but the move forward on that is we can glue a lot of that stuff together with DuckDB and Python, right?
Yeah.
So
but you mentioned something interesting here, is that I believe like a lot of BI tool advertise to say you can do ad hoc reports made easy, because you're like any C level for objective business people, they enumerate from dashboard from the data team, which are pretty, static and limited. And usually they say, yeah, you can change the dimension there and build a new dashboard. But I feel often when you have those ad hoc requests, you need a specific data source, which is often, not there, or that you need, as you mentioned, go to the QuickBooks to run something. So you basically kind of play a detective, and you are not sure where to look at the data. And then usually, if there is meaningful, repeatable insight, you hand over that to the data team, which pass it in the dashboard. But I feel that's what happened to me. It's like some ad hoc report, has been transformed later on full data project, right? Um, but I feel like this is where DuckDB shine, is that there is an easy way to ingest and to pull from various sources. And I guess that's where we have like there is that, and there is like someone commented uh, something Jacob mentioned recently. I had to process huge Excel file with many tabs to end up processing. So I think apart from the size, there is like the flexibility of the ingestion, maybe.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say is I'm a very pragmatic data engineer. Like, I would rather not do any data engineering, um, but I have to do it to get the answers I need, right, to solve the questions the business is asking. And so in the past, right, when you're using things like Excel, a lot of conventions, you prioritize results over convention. And I think one thing that DuckDB lets us do is it lets us, take a reproducible approach, right? Respect the convention of how we do data analysis without trading off on, the ability to deliver results, right?
Yeah.
That's the part that excites me the most about it, is like it just fits in your workflow. I don't have to change it. It's very easy to train other people on. There's a bunch of really great other projects, that use DuckDB as well, right, to kind of make this stuff easier, right? One thing that I'll share that I did at previous company was we were all SQL Server users, and so everyone's familiar with the SQL Server IDE, which is called SQL Server Management Studio.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone across the company, across the operational and finance functions, knew that tool, and we're using it regularly. And so being able to have like a dbeaver integrates really nicely with DuckDB, and kind of can give that IDE type experience. Same with Harlequin, which is another one that I like to use kind of in the command line. And so users, the lift to get users kind of starting with SQL from a CSV is much lighter now too, right? It's like, all right, there's analogs for the tools you already know, right, to get started, which is really cool too.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think back then you either needed, if you wanted something local to parse a CSV like custom tool, the easy way was Python, but then you need, library, coding, a bit of coding language, a Python environment, and even like before container locally and so on. That was pretty much hard to just install Python. So yeah, the barrier to entry to just parse and read a CSV was hard. I think Google Sheet did a pretty good job after to integrate like import CSV and so on. I see someone commented my data stack is 1% BigQuery and 99%
Yeah,
Google Sheet.
that sounds right. Sounds right.
That's about right. But yeah, so that's fantastic. Moving on, so you have a couple of things to show us. So maybe we can go through that, and I'll probably ask the dummy question. And if you have any question in the audience, please let us know. We'll stop and answer them with pleasure. So I'll put your slide there.
Cool. Yeah, we'll just go through some slides. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but we'll kind of bounce around.
Yep.
So, this is just kind of like putting us in context, like what kind of stuff can we do? Alex wrote a great article about doing some very crazy things that are kind of unconventional with SQL, for example, right? We can use it inside of tools like Hex, for example. We can do lots of visualizations really fast with something like Mosaic, right? We have the evidence guys building this stuff out, Universal SQL. Which I've used in MDS in a Box, which is a project that I run. And of course, you can do this. You can also do things like this. This is Jake Thomas. He did a great talk. We're taking a look at about crazy scale, during doing a serverless kind of like parallel processing over Okta. So right, and it's fast, right? As we talked about, someone called out previously, like you take all this Excel stuff that's all these different tabs, all these different formats, and you can just pipe it right into DuckDB and do all of your work. I think one of the first things I did, I was working on this. This is 2021 probably. I was working on just a fun like Wordle solver, right? So you could put in whatever your status was in the game Wordle, and you could put in the letters, and it would tell you which word to guess next. Anyways, so I took a pretty gross unoptimized CTE, and it took 487 seconds in Postgres and 6 seconds in DuckDB. So probably even faster now, right? It's getting way faster across all these benchmarks and lots of things. Pandas takes 4,500 seconds versus DuckDB taking 48, for example, on this 50 gigabyte data set. So yeah, lots of great things. I would be curious. I wonder how these benchmarks perform versus Excel. The answer is probably like doesn't run or like out of memory. But
that is really interesting. That is really interesting. We haven't done. Everybody's fighting against the database,
Yeah.
And the reality is that people are using also Excel as their tooling, right? They're using Excel in Databricks and Excel in Snowflake. So it would be still interesting to see how far you could do, some common things over there. But just running the queries, I think you need extra plugging or whatsoever. So
yeah. I'm not sure how much RAM I would need to do that. Okay, so what's really cool is because our tools are way better, right? We get to do a bunch of other stuff too. Ad hoc analysis becomes trivial, right? And so we can do more faster, which is great. More faster is a great outcome, but my favorite outcome is we also can do it better. So I'll talk more about kind of what my approach is there in a second. I think I see a question here in the comments.
Yeah, it's mostly related to the behavior. So we'll come back to that to that later.
Okay, very cool. We'll come back to it. So what does it look like to do better analysis? I think a lot of this kind of comes from my experience, running accounting and operational teams. Persist the results, right? That's already baked into like most accounting software, right? So it's really easy to go back and see what was my profit, last year versus this year. But that's like intentional, right? Those systems are designed to do that. A lot of our, systems that don't have a financial backing don't do that necessarily out of the box, right? What was my Salesforce pipeline yesterday versus today? That can be a difficult question to answer. So doing better analysis means persisting results, running it again, and then, can we put it on a trend, right? And if we can just do those three things, you're probably in like the top 10% of data analysts, right? So like, here on the left, you can see this is just a single point. Does it mean anything? I don't know. It means that the value was about, 300 on September 11th, right? If we put it on a trend, we can see something a little different, which is like, what is exceptional, what is not exceptional. Normally we're around 200, so maybe 300 was slightly higher than usual. We had a spike, sometime in the middle of September. That tells us that's a jumping off point. Why do we have that there? And I think that is the interesting piece that we can unlock, just thinking about, taking these ad hoc requests and then putting them into trends over time. So
it's really about the what I was mentioning, the repeatable process, right? Because I feel like
it doesn't even need to be repeatable, right? Like a financial month-end process that's generating your financial statements is like repeatable in the sense that humans do stuff, but it's not like someone clicks a button and runs a pipeline, right? So what we really need to is a way to take whatever the result of that and save it somewhere, right? And so that's the piece. Let's see if we can get to the next page. Okay. Right. So my proposal here is that we can use MotherDuck as a meta layer to store the results of the ad hoc analysis, right? So if I'm doing an analysis that tells me my sales pipeline was, $1 million last week, let's just write those results somewhere. Let's get them into MotherDuck, and then I can look later and I can write another number in. I can see it's 1.2 million this week, and I can see that there's a change. I don't need necessarily the granularity to know exactly why things changed, right? Like the granularity is nice and great, but also it adds a bunch of complexity, right? That's something that like accounting systems understand kind of existentially, right? Is one thing that's good about them is they're conformed on a certain set of dimensions, right? We have like GAAP in the US. That also like begs the question of like, why did things change? You have to actually look at the data and kind of interpret it to know. The granularity that you need is not necessarily in the data, right? And that's okay. That's an okay trade-off. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a pitch. I don't want to lean too hard in on it, but like, I'll show a couple of examples of something I did. I run this project called MDS in a Box. It's an NBA forecast. It forecasts some other stuff too. But one thing it does is every time it runs, it generates a new forecast, and the old forecast is fully replaced, right? So it's a classic ad hoc report in that sense. So what I've done is built a little loop to actually persist results. So like here's an example of what I'm doing here. This is DBT. I don't know if anyone's familiar with DBT, but it's saving basically probabilities of certain events occurring for specific teams. And so I'm using a post hook to drop that data set as Parquet into kind of my local data lake, right? And then what I can do is I actually set like a var in my DBT run, so I can actually run point in time, kind of go back in time. This is kind of a unique thing. This is probably like a misuse of how those DBT variables were intended to be used, but I can basically back calculate the effectiveness of the model and then run it in a loop with make. So once I have all that data, right, I can just use a little bit of Python and mostly SQL to load the data into MotherDuck, right? This is just SQL. These are just SQL statements, right? This is just a stored procedure, right? There's not anything too complex happening here. The thing that we're doing is making the choice to load the results of our ad hoc analysis into somewhere for analysis later, right? So what's really cool is this lets us kind of look back at trends, right? So for example, what I would see right now in my ad hoc report results, if I were to look at the Milwaukee Bucks, for example, I would see this information. They won 49 games because the season's over. Their seed is the 3rd seed. Their predicted wins is 49. That matches the actual wins, of course, because the season's over. And they underperformed versus what their expectation was at the beginning of the season, right? But like, what can we see by looking at this over time, right? And so what I did is I said every day that I run the model, I'm going to just look at what their predicted wins are for each day, right? So I can see that in January, something happened, right? And so now this tells me, hey, something happened at that event. Let me go look in the data and figure out what's going on, right?
And what's usually your process into like those kind of steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this leans heavily on like Deming and statistical process control, really, which is about looking at things over time and then identifying when trends change, right? So in this case, we can look at that line and we can see the trend goes down, outside of kind of ranges that were unexpected around that time in January, right? There's there's actually a set of rules kind of in the Deming kind of Wheeler space of statistical process controls, where one of them is like if you have more, I think it's like 7 out of 8 dots over the average in a row, it tells you that your distribution has changed. And so you can
Okay.
actually see we had kind of 2 different distributions, right? We had one here before before January and then after January, and we can say, all right, here's where this thing occurred, right? What happened? Oh, they fired their coach, right? They got worse. They fired their coach and they got worse. That's probably not the outcome they were expecting, but at least we can kind of look back and say, hey, by tracking this ad hoc metric, which is predicted wins, we can actually see changes in trends. So we got a couple more. I'm not going to talk too much about these, but this one's one of my favorite ones. This is the Philadelphia 76ers. So we can see kind of 2 distribution changes, one right here and then one right here. Their MVP best player was injured and then he was injured again. So, it's actually kind of funny because you can tell pretty much exactly that this player was worth like, almost 9 extra wins, right? They were trending to about 55 wins, and they ended up around 47. Let's say 8, right? So we can actually learn. We can actually kind of learn implied things about how their team works. Anyways, all right, I'm gonna stop sharing because it's just more NBA, whatever. But like, I think the point is made, which is, by tracking these outputs, right? You could think about this as like, imagine that this number instead of NBA wins was total number of prospects in your pipeline, right? Well, now all of a sudden you have a really interesting narrative that like that leads you to a jumping off point to say, hey, things are getting better, or are they getting worse? Why? Right? And really kind of get to the heart of why we do this data analysis in the first place.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I think it's always like a challenge. Maybe we can talk about the downfall of like the ad hoc reporting, what you've seen, like kind of like anti-pattern, or like maybe slowing you more down than providing you insights. You have some. You seem laughing, so I think it's a good question.
It's a really good question. I think especially if you've worked like directly for an executive team, there's a real balance on ad hoc reporting. Okay, what I mean by that is there's kind of 2 outcomes you're aiming for, right? There's one outcome you're aiming for, which is you do the ad hoc analysis. They say, hey, Jacob, great job. This is awesome. This will really help us, make a decision, right? The bad outcome is, hey, Jacob, really great job. I need this every Monday, right? Because now all of a sudden I've turned an ad hoc report into a pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So in the past, that meant like, oh crap, like I have to pull all this data down, and in order to kind of make this work. What it also did, though, was it meant that, hey, I'm not going to actually do the extra work to make this pipeline, or to turn this into a pipeline, because it was too hard. Right now it's way easier. So you can build, I would almost say like by default, my approach on ad hoc reporting would be to think about it from a pipeline perspective. Right. I was almost prevented because of previous tools to think about it from a pipeline perspective, because if it was too good, I would then get, stuck doing that analysis every week. Right. And I didn't have the tools to actually scale myself. Right. Or be like, hey, I'm going to, I need to add more people if you want that every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a meme about that that I cannot see. It's like find it back where you have basically a bridge which is starting. So you think as a pipeline, it's like an ad hoc, and then you had like some tape around to to make it more frequently. And it's just, I feel like it's sometimes hard to find the balance to say, I do agree that the tools are getting easier to think in terms of pipelines directly. That I think we should all do that. But sometimes you have to take shortcuts, right? And sometimes there is a point where you need to slow down to say, okay, let's refactor this code, because initially I did this query for um, a 1 day ad hoc report, which was 1 hour before the sea level meeting. So there is kind of like a different, you know, time pressure versus, okay, how do I
Yep.
make this robust so that it's generated every day and read by 100 people, which is completely a different requirement, I feel. So yeah, but in
Yep.
knowing your requirements for ad hoc reports and finding the right balance to say sometimes no, pushing it back to, yeah, do
Sure.
you actually really need that? Is great. But I really like the point of the mindset of um, think it as a pipeline. And by this thing, I have actually another small thing I wanted to show. I show you just before. I already spoke Jacob. um, but with DuckDB CLI, if you think you can do a lot of things just with the CLI and ad hoc reports if you're looking at some data. The only thing missing is basically a bit of plotting in the terminal, right? Because you can quickly pull data in, data out with the CLI, um, but you can display numbers. But sometimes, having just a bar chart plots help you visualize what's going on, or line chart. And by the way, in the next release, in DuckDB 1.1, do you know what's happening, Jacob?
No, what's happening?
Okay, so there will be a function to actually build in DuckDB to display the results as as a bar chart. So in the terminal. So that would be,
Oh,
I think,
great.
pretty cool,
Charting in the
because
terminal. That's
for
awesome.
yeah. So just for simple bar charts, but you can already do that by using uplot. So uplot, if you're on macOS, you just do a brew install uplot. There is also a guide, uplot guide. Let me share that with the audience right
Hmm.
now. So DuckDB has a guide over there if you want to know more. But basically, I did some black magic, which and here you see I'm doing just a one-time command. So I'm invoking the DB CLI. I'm copying and getting data from. This is the extension download uh, from DuckDB. So there is always a JSON file hosted there, which is the last week download, and basically put it out on this std out as a CSV and passing by to the uplot, which, as mentioning, is like enable you to plot in the terminal. And so what happens when I just hit that command? So I'm piping the results, and I can directly display it. And look at how it's beautiful. So this is really like, in terms of pipeline, this is an ad hoc report. I'm, watching how many downloads each DuckDB extension has been going, and it's just one command. So this is really easily reproducible, compared to, I would say, what we were taught, the dinosaur tools where you have a server and you're pretty limited to what you can install locally in Yada. So yeah, I think it's pretty neat example to also illustrate what you can do, and you're going to be able to do a bit more chart building in DuckDB. But I'm curious, if you're using the CLI, let us know if you have creative ways of displaying things with your plots. I think there is a lot to play.
That's great.
Anyway,
Now you need to write those results into MotherDuck so you can track it over time. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's just one command, and actually I could query instead of like calling the data source, just query a database from MotherDuck and also display it in the terminal. So so that would be fun actually. Not anymore needed a BI tool, just my terminal.
No.
Pushing the fix to the extreme. I wanted to ask you also regarding the ad hoc reports. What do you think is missing in the classic BI tools today to enable, more reactive ad hoc reports?
That's such a good question. I think the reality is I would like to see way more SQL everywhere. Even in my dashboard, right?
Like evidence?
Not, I mean, like evidence, sure, but like what I really want to do is if I'm on like a evidence page, is be able to like, press a combination of keys and see all the data that's presented on that page, and just use like DuckDB WASM to mash it up to maybe show a different view. Right. I don't even need to necessarily chart it, but the problem, what ends up inevitably happening is like, I need to get data from some Tableau dashboard over here, maybe an evidence dashboard over here, HubSpot over here. I pull them all into CSV, and then I still can use DuckDB, but I still have to do that step. Right. Yeah. Imagine if those all had like WASM front ends that you could connect to each other, right? Like attach Tableau data set to, my evidence data set. Right. Yeah. Obviously, like notionally that is like very far away, but like, I think that we have managed to figure out a clever way to separate our transactional workloads from our analytical workloads. And so the next question is, how do I get all of my analytical workloads together in one place? Right. I think that it's a great talking point to put on a slide deck to say we're going to talk about a single source of truth. But the reality is it's messy. And I see, one of the things that's really cool we can do internally at MotherDuck is I can be inside of the MotherDuck tool, and I can hit our data warehouse, which is also in MotherDuck, and then add a CSV to my WASM local and do reporting on it, right? Or hit a Google Sheet, and I can say, hey, take a list of these customers in this Google Sheet, join that into my data warehouse, and give me a list of all the ones that have run, X number of queries in the last 10 days, right? Yeah. Those are things that are out of reach, right, of like most tools today. But like if you think about what the extensibility is with something like DuckDB kind of backing all of that, you can start pulling together all these kind of loose threads without having to necessarily worry about doing data engineering.
Yeah, so instead of having this button, export your data as CSV, which is, already one step further, you could open a DuckDB shell and directly query the data over there, right?
Yes.
And then if you're a bit more smart, then you may have, a way to access that. Because, today a lot of like internal tools when you want to query those data sets, either is an API, so there is an extra work to do, or even like, exporting the CSV is, one extra step that you need to do. So that makes a lot of sense to me. It's I think it's still, we're still not there, but it's a creative.
It's the future that I would like to imagine. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the other point you mentioned about BI tool, and I mean, thinking ad hoc report as pipeline is one thing, but I think also thinking, that you said, it's not necessarily plotting thing. That's true, but I think there is also thinking plots and any dashboard as code too, because that's much more reproducible and tunable, right? And I think that's what missed in the previous BI world, where people do ad hoc report, they create new manually reports, and then they need to refactor things or improve things, and it's really hard because it's just an UI. So they and I think people d- underestimate the effort to maintain dashboarding assets, and I think they should be treated as code. It's a software asset, so there's no reason why it should not be treated as code related to your need of having a SQL interface for digging into your data. So yeah, I think the two together would be pretty neat. And I think there is tools like we mentioned, evidence, which are actually they were actually in the chat. So hello, evidence people. Um, but tool like evidence also and other BI tools as a code are embracing kind of those best practice where you can easily reproduce your ad hoc reports. We had a couple of ad hoc question, and we have a couple of minutes left, which are completely random question. But let's take some minutes to answer.
Sure.
Someone asked me a challenge with the behavior, and I think you've been using the behavior. I'm not a user. I mentioned that you can join also the MotherDuck Slack if we want to help debug. But you have any solution out of your mind directly there?
Yeah. So in your connection manager in DuckDB, in dbeaver, you can set it to match the path of your database, and it should be able to read that. Now keep in mind that you can only have one reader attached to a database at a time, so you can run into some conflicts there if you're not careful. The other thing you can do is in dbeaver is you can put as your connection string, you can do MD:, and it'll actually just pull in your MotherDuck databases also. So you can just, if you are using MotherDuck, you just do MD: and dbeaver, and now all of your databases are available.
Yeah, it's true that
So that's the
you
other
can
trick as
connect
well.
directly, to multiple database with one connection to MotherDuck. Another random question. I can answer this one. I like this question. I'm an aspiring data engineer, and one question that how to grab the DE internship, because I've heard they are pretty low. We can both answer this one. I think for me, it's all about first your network. You need to kind of connect to people in the industry, like following those live stream as you do, but also in person meetups, and finding people that would give you this opportunity because they had contact before with you, right? Not just a cold email to say, hey, I'm looking as an internship. So I think having discussion or learning with people, that's the first point. And the second one is just sharing your project, sharing your side project. And one thing underrated that the biggest mistake I've seen in side project is that people have a GitHub repo and that's it, like with a README setup. No, a full I would say side project is something that someone can use and uh, try without going to a README setup project. No one is gonna do installation of running your project locally. So have something to show off. And even if you are a data engineer and you're not good at reporting, nowadays it's pretty easy to do something. So you did something with uh, MDS in the box, right, Jacob? And I think the other things I put recently is DuckDB stats. So those are, for example, two projects you can look and get inspired, but there is multiple way to highlight your project so that it's visible to the outside. What's your take on that, Jacob?
I think my take is a little bit maybe more contrarian, but I think that I read recently that insight comes from action, not analysis. So if you think about what the point is of working in data, right? It's a lot about that. What kind of insights can we drive? So don't be afraid to get into the domain, right? I started in the domain. I did not end here get here, or I did not start, in the domain to eventually get into data. But here I am. I think that there's data all around us. One conversation I remember with a guy who had just graduated from school and was working at a brewery, kind of running the front of house, and he was like, I'm trying to get into data, but we don't have any data here. And how do I break in? Right. He had just gotten like an undergrad degree in like data science. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, there's data all around you. Like, think about what is in your point of sale system, right? How do you get that out and turn that into something useful? You guys are making your own beer. That's like a very data intensive process, right? To improve it. There's very precise chemistry happening, in those processes, that you can use data to improve. And so, that was the first bit was advice. The second part was really interesting. It's like about 6 months later, he's like, hey, I'm still running the front of house, but what I was able to do is use our point of sale system to see when we were getting the most sales, and then use that to schedule, folks when folks worked, right? When we were staffed. And I said, exactly, right? Like that, like, it's not that you have to be able to see it. Like, I think, and that can be a little hard, but like, don't be afraid of the domain. There's lots of opportunities, especially in smaller companies that are going to let you just, pip install whatever you want on your laptop, to kind of build your own pipelines. You don't necessarily need to be, reporting into a data function. Finance and ops are great places to start too.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think I had an example where someone I know was working in fintech, and I had a lot of knowledge about how online payments is working, and the protocol and so on, and the partners that are required. And was mostly working as a product person, but less technical. And he wanted to go into data, but for him, going into data analyst was actually pretty makes sense, because he had a lot of knowledge on the domain knowledge to make valuable insight and sense from a fintech perspectives business. So yeah, can definitely relate that nowadays with data engineering you have so much technical tools to master, and we often forget that if you are good within actually a couple of domains, then you can also stand out. Cool. That was the last one, and on that, I think we can close on this. Do you have any closing thoughts or things you are looking forward, Jacob?
DuckDB 1.1, right, coming out in September. So lots of new tools to play with. I'm very excited.
That is very true. And the bar chart display, right, within the terminal.
Yep. Indeed. So lots of fun stuff happening there. Yeah, I'm excited.
Cool. Yeah, that will be a couple of weeks, and actually the team of MotherDuck will be also in Europe by that time that's this release. So probably can do also something. Yeah, so that was Quack and Code. You can check out MotherDuck/events for any other online events, both MotherDuck and outside MotherDuck, all duck related. Also festival about ducks. No, I'm joking. Technical DuckDB MotherDuck related. And yeah, I'll see you soon online. Thank you, Jacob, for joining.
All right, Mehdi, we'll chat later.